talk about today. Income, not income, but how money is spent in happiness. So how does, we talked a little bit about a different kind of aspect of this, which is spending on experiences as opposed to stuff. But this is a little different. People are told that when you do, nice things for people, that you're happier. Pro-social behavior promotes well-being. That's something that you might get on a fairly regular basis from all kinds of sources, including going to church, stuff like that. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that buying awesome stuff for yourself makes you happy. So it's spending money. The question is, spending money on yourself make you happy, or spending money on other people? And again, you could make the case either way. You could, this certainly is fun to own. Probably is fun to own. But then on the other hand, doing things for other people also can make you feel good. So you can't necessarily say for sure without looking at the data. So we're going to look at the data and see what the data say. So 632 people in this sample. Maybe it's a nationally representative sample, which means about 15% of the U.S. is black, and so about 15% of the population of black ages. Right, this is selected to resemble the U.S. more than just a random sampling would. They measured income, and we already know that there's a link between income and happiness. So what they do is they measure income and statistically control for that, so that doesn't interfere with what we're looking at.
That's why I don't know what happened. I'm literally just typing notes.
It sounded like somebody was wheezing.
Yeah, that could have happened. I'm not sure.
So, do you feel happy in general? People ask that. Then measured how much they spent each month. There's an elaborate questionnaire with all kinds of things about what people spend each month, or the previous month, and then also ask them about this. How much did you spend pro-socially? So gifts to others, donations to charity, that kind of thing. And the question is, what's the relationship? And again, they measured income, but that's just to set that aside to statistically control for that. And personal spending had no effect. So people spending more money on yourself did not make people happier. But spending money on other people did. So, and if you look back, the amounts are, people spent $1,700 on themselves. I'm not necessarily saying they're selfish, but as a portion, this is much smaller, right? On average, $146 a month on others. But those who were above that number would have been happier on average than people who were below that number. So correlational research suggests that people who spend more on others are happier. Does this surprise you? No. So when you're talking about correlational research, there's kind of two, when you talk about a correlation, there's kind of two different ways to kind of reinterpret what that correlation means. So the way I'm reading this is people who spend more money on others are happier. But so this, as I'm sure you're aware, means alcohol abuse and depression are linked. Right, you can see that. So you could read this and say that alcohol abuse causes depression. What's another way to understand that?
Depression causes alcohol abuse.
Exactly, depression causes. So, I guess the double arrow kind of gave it away, right? But, so this is the reverse causality idea, right? So when you see a correlation, you can understand it by, or one way to understand it is by reading it the other way. So what would that mean in the case of spending money on others and happiness? The way I understood it was, people who spend money on others are happier. What's a different way to understand that, using this reverse causation?
If someone gives you something, it's gonna make you happier. So-
No.
If you're a happy person, you're more likely to spend money on someone else.
Yeah, exactly. So it starts with and that's also plausible, right?
Did they like compare giving a gift to like a family member versus giving money to just a random charity? Like, is that produce more happiness? Because I think like if I just gave to a charity, I think that's less happiness for me than giving to like my wife.
Say that again.
So
What
like, if I give a gift to my wife, that
makes
would
you less
result in more
happy?
happiness for me
Oh.
versus donating to a random charity. Did they compare anything versus who the money goes to, or
No.
just a random?
No, that's a good question. That's a good question. I don't have a good answer for it. Anyone's that?
Killing people gives you ice cream?
That's it. So there,
I do it? Yes.
so there is this correlation between between violent crime and ice cream consumption.
Really?
It is, but you gotta figure out why. And this is, we had sex students, you've heard this before.
Okay. So it's because when it's hot, people are longer outside or more outside, and because of that, there are more murders. Because people are like more on the streets than at home than in the winter.
Exactly. So this is the third very problem.
Keep talking.
There we go. So there's some other factor than that explains this relationship. So these are related, but it would be a mistake to conclude that one causes the other, right? There's a third thing. So somebody tell me how the data we're talking about here, how you could interpret this, right? Using third variable.
It could just be people who are in a better off financial position are also more likely, more able to donate money. And it's not the fact that they're donating the money, it's the fact that they're in this really good financial spot that's making them happier.
So they did measure income and put that aside. So just based on this, that works, except that in this case, they didn't take, they controlled for income.
It could be that people that have better relationships and are more social are more happier, and that also, because they're more social, they give more gifts and spend more on other people.
That's great, yeah. So that would be a third variable. That's another way to understand this relationship. So the point is, correlations are helpful, but there's other ways to understand them. And so, kind of to get around that, that's why we do experiments. And what they did here was an experiment to see if you can find a causal relationship, meaning if you can make people give money to others, can you see, are they happier? So in this study, people were, well, first of all, they do this often, this kind of thing often where everybody at the university, they do, or everybody usually who's taking a psychology class has to take a questionnaire at the beginning of the semester. Has anyone done this? Where you guys don't, I guess you don't do it here. Okay. Where everybody taking like a psychology class would take a question, well, it's actually, at some universities, it's like 45 minutes worth of questionnaires, because everybody throws their different questionnaire. Anyway, point is, they get, what the purpose of that is to get a baseline, right? So, because lots of people differ in happiness, and so you want to get a baseline measure for all the individual differences in happiness. And then people, a couple months later, they might get invited to this study, and as part of the study, they either get $5 or $20 randomly, and then they're told either to spend it on themselves or to spend it on someone else. Not a bad experiment to be invited to. And then, like I said, they had pre-measures of happiness, and then after they completed the study, they brought them back and gave them another questionnaire which measured their happiness. And so, also had them report on what they bought, earrings, food, makeup, that kind of stuff. Pro-social, toys for siblings, donations to the homeless, buying stuff for friends, that kind of thing. So here are the results. Who's, Magdalena, you look very
Yeah.
thoughtful about this.
Right.
Can you,
I'm confused.
you're confused?
Yeah.
Who's
So-
unconfused?
Oh, thanks.
When they spent it on personal, their happiness dropped, and when they spent it on pro-social, it rose.
So this is if there had been no change at all from, remember, they got that baseline measure, and then this was following up with them later. So people who spent on themselves a little bit happier, or a little bit less happy. And what's going on up here?
Why is 5
Well, that's
Because
a
it was
question.
less that they had to give away, but they were like, okay, $5, and then the 20, I was like, okay, you can have it, I'll give it to
Yeah,
charity.
can you say that louder, because I think that's right.
Do what, okay, they had $5 to give away, and it was kind of just like, okay, here's $5 to charity. But when it's $20, it's a bigger amount, so you're like, okay, I guess I'll give it to you.
Yeah, so it does seem, it seems like, it hurts a little bit to give $20 away, $5 doesn't hurt as much, and so people after the fact are a little bit happier after giving the $5.
So how come they got free money and their happiness went down?
I don't know.
Because isn't that what it's saying? Like they got free money and then they were less happy afterwards?
Yeah, I
They
mean,
had
this,
to-
so here, I've been saying, I don't know if you've heard me say this, that if things work out, if you run an experiment and things look perfect when you're done, that's when you should be suspicious that something's going on. So I sort of suspect that in general, these are kind of quirks and flukes. Every study I've ever conducted, and I've conducted a lot of them, data never look perfect. And so even though this isn't really what you'd expect, the broad pattern still fits, which is spending money on other people makes you happier. That part I buy. I don't necessarily agree that getting free money, I guess, not agree or disagree. I don't know if this would replicate, right? Does that make sense? This pattern where you spend money on others, that makes you happier, that I think would replicate.
Were they interested in how many people chose personal versus how many people chose?
There was no choosing, and this is what
okay.
makes it an experiment, right? Because if you allow people to choose, then you're back to the correlation thing.
So you're just told which one?
You're just told, yeah, randomly. So you didn't get to choose whether it was 5 or 20. You didn't get to choose spend on yourself. All right, that's $5 and $20. That's not real money. That's unreal money. The next study looked at actual real money. Did this at a business that announced they had a profit sharing program. They don't release the details of this kind of thing in a study, but this is pretty sure how this would have gone down, which is there's a professor who teaches marketing or consumer behavior who has a friend who runs a business, and that's how they kind of figured out how to do this, right? I'm almost certain that's how this kind of thing would have come about. So this company announces profit sharing program, but first they measure everybody's kind of baseline measure of happiness, and then people are given money. Again, this isn't the 5 or the 20, it's a substantial amount of money. And then they check back with them 8 weeks later, and they ask them how happy they were. What else did they ask them? How did you spend your money, right? What did you do with it? And, you know, people spend on self, on others, obligations, all kinds of things. And it's the same basic pattern, which is people who spent money on themselves were not necessarily happier. It's not that they were less happy, it's just that it didn't have any relationship. But spending money on others, even a relatively small portion of it, that led to people being happier. So that's happiness and how money's spent. Last thing I want to talk about as far as kind of psychological impact of money is social distance. When you hear social distance, what does that sound like to you? Go ahead.
Just like putting yourself away from like something that's happening socially, like your social environment or situation, kind of like going away from it.
Yeah, what were you gonna say?
Just like it from a perspective of money, like the more money you have, you think you're better than other people socially.
That's good. That's good. Those are both pretty close to what we're talking about. It's the idea that thinking about money leads to people wanting to have more distance from other people.
Replace people.
Well, I think there's an element of that, which is when you have a lot of money, you don't necessarily need other people, right? That maybe you're less reliant on other people. Whatever it is, we'll talk about the experiments. But it seems like thinking about money makes people want a little more distance. So the way they did the study was kind of clever in that people were brought into the lab and they were given a bunch of questionnaires, but they weren't interested in their answers to the questionnaires. They sat them at a desk and they had them fill these questionnaires out. The thing that they were really interested in was the screensaver. So they had the screensaver set to either be a money screensaver, so you sat there filling out your questionnaires with money, in front of you, or a fish screensaver. And then there was a third condition where it was no screensaver. And so the idea is you're sitting there for 10 or 15 minutes with dollar bills floating in front of you, and you think it's the questionnaire, but it's really the money that's the kind of the key to the experiment. Are you with me? So the next step then is to tell them that there's going to have a conversation with somebody. There's 2 chairs, set them up, and what is it that they were interested in?
Where they'll sit.
What's that?
Where they'll sit, either farther or closer to the person.
Yep. So it measured the distance between the chairs. And so when did people have their chairs farther apart? Right, when they sat in front of the screen with the dollars floating. And then if you look at the average, sometimes the effects you get are pretty weak and trivial, but this is pretty substantial, right? So it looks like it's about a foot difference, right? So that's a good amount it's a lot of distance. So that was the first study. They did this a second time with some kind of different way of doing it. So instead of having people watch, same kind of setup, except instead of screensavers, you sat in a room with a poster, and the poster was, they did this in Canada, so it's Canadian currency. So you sat in a room with just a big thing of currency on the wall, versus one of these paintings. So why not just do currency on the wall versus a room with nothing on the wall?
Since something's in it.
You need control.
Yeah, well, you don't want it to be because there's a decoration on the wall, right? You want it to be because it's that particular kind of, right? It needs to be. So that's a good way to to rule out other explanations is not because there's something colorful on the wall, right? It's because it's specifically money. And then they asked them, I think, 7 different questions, which was, which would you prefer? Renting 3 favorite movies alone or 2 tickets to a movie theater? So what does this tell us? What is your answer to this tell us?
Alone or social, going with friends.
What's that?
Watching movies by yourself or going to a movie theater with friends.
Yeah, so the implication is, and the reason it's 3, I think, is to kind of make the monetary values a little bit closer. But the idea is this about you doing something alone, or is this about you doing something socially? Another one would be hanging out at a cafe with a friend versus reading a favorite book, same kind of thing. 1-day spa package versus going to a theme park with a group. No, probably something in Canada. And so of the, so they were given 7 again. On average, you can see when the people preferred the alone option more often when they sat in front of the screen. So it seems like thinking about money kind of fosters this desire to put a little more distance between you and other people. Or maybe flowers bring you together. So it seems like thinking about money creates some kind of social separation